Welcome to Methods 2, Week 9. We are going to be looking at InDesign today. So let's get started. Okay, let's get started in InDesign. So we all have it open, and the first thing that you want to do is create a new file. So let's create a new file here on the left. And it'll ask you what size file you want to make and what kind of file are we making in this class. We always make our 11 by 17 PDFs. So let's set ourselves up over here. We want to change our units to inches. And here the default, it's setting you up for letters. So let's change this to 17 inches, change this to 11. And then we want to pick horizontal as our orientation or landscape. And then to start out, I'll show you what facing pages are and we will go from there. So that's all you need to set up, and just hit create. And let's see what we get. So we get this framework. We've got a margin that comes in here by default at 1/2 inch. And otherwise we have a blank 11 by 17 piece of paper. And so you can see here over on the side, you've got something called pages, and it'll allow you to keep adding pages to your document. So we'll start doing that. The first thing I want to do though is let's set up our workspace. So if you look up here in the top right, you can see we have this option here called Essentials. Let's just go here and change it to Essentials Classic. And that's going to bring up a lot of the tools that you need to operate. So in our workspace, let's just look at what we have here. We've got the same file layout, object, elements up here. We've got some stuff about layout and fonts and sizes up here. And then we have some tools on the side. Some you'll recognize, some you will not. But the basic idea of InDesign is that we can put any image into a sheet. We can have these images be high res, medium res, low res, but they'll actually be accessing and referencing a file as opposed to being inserted into a document. So as opposed to perhaps PowerPoint, which you've used before, where every time you put an image, it gets embedded into the document, and the document gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more you add to it. InDesign never becomes this huge file because it's always referencing the document separately. So I will show you how that works, but let's just start with the basic ideas of what's going on here. So we want to put images into a document. So the first thing we want to do over here is there's what we call frames in InDesign. So if you go over here to the rectangular frame tool, it's the little box with an X in it. If you grab that and you just make a frame on the sheet, now you have a frame, and that's what you can insert a picture into. So I want to insert a picture in here. So let's go to, there's a couple different ways you can put pictures in. The best thing to do is to go to File and go to Place. And what Place will do, if you have the frame selected, if you select the frame here, it will allow you to place the file into that document. So we could go into, I have a file here, so we're looking for our images. So let's see, we have some files up here in week 8. And we have a picture, this is my dog. Let's put my dog in here because he's adorable. And now we have placed him into the frame. So let's see what is happening here. So we're not seeing the whole picture. If we go up here, we've got two sets of arrows. So let's click on the top arrow, what we call the hollow arrow. And with that, we can actually grab that frame and move it. And now what we're doing is we're revealing more of the image. So if we go here, you can see that we've actually hit the edge of that image. So we can do that in any direction. So you can actually crop an image without actually having to crop an image. So if I just wanted to see his nose, I could crop it and just see his nose. Usually, however, we actually want to see most of the image that we have. So let's look at all the different ways we can adjust a picture inside the frame. So once I have my picture selected, I'm going to right click, and there's this component here called fitting, and there's also a number of fitting options up here at the top. But I like these because they're just a little bit more descriptive, especially when you're learning something new. So let's just go through these and see what happens. So first, let's try fill frame proportionally. Now, proportionally is a really important word here because InDesign will do one of two things. It'll keep your image at the same proportions, i.e. not distort it at all, or it will just fill a frame with a picture to make a sheet look good. So let's see what happens when we do fill frame proportionally. So now we've taken it and it's filled the frame with the picture, but it's still cropping, I know, because I know this picture, it's still cropping out some of the dog, but it's still filling the frame. So let's see what else we can do. Another option to fitting, fit content proportionally. This is one that I use a lot. Now what we have is we have the full photograph inside the frame, and the frame is actually now bigger than the photograph, but we're seeing the full extent of the photo. So this, I think, is a good solution to start with. But then what do we do with this extra stuff on the side? Well, let's see what other options there are. We can right click. Let's see, we can do fit frame to content. And watch what happens here. Is now the frame is perfectly matched to my picture, right? So those three I tend to use a lot. You can also do fit content to the frame. Let's see how that works. I'm going to actually make the frame a little bit bigger so we can see how that one works. So now I've got this bigger frame, right click, fit content to frame. Now he looks weird because we've distorted him, right? We haven't kept the proportions. We can also do center content, which will center the dog inside the frame, or the image inside the frame. And then of these other options, I would say those are the most useful. So these first two, fill frame proportionally, fit content proportionally, and fit frame to content and center content, those are the most useful tools here. So I'm just going to fit my frame back to my content, and then we'll look at what else we can do with these images. Okay, now that we have the dog and the frame, let's see what we can do with this frame. So I'm going to select it again with that hollow arrow. And then I'm going to go up here to my tools. And I've got a number of tool files that are default here. So let's do two things. I'm going to also open a separate frame. And I'm going to select both of them so we can see what happens when we adjust them both. So what we have with a frame is we have a fill, which is the interior, and then they call the stroke, which is the outside. So we can do different colors and different outlines on these objects. So right now, they're both empty. You can see it here. You got a zero or a white with a red line through it on both of these. So say we want to make an outline on this. So we want to change the stroke. So you can see as you go up, it allows you to do larger and larger frames. And if we wanted to, so that works for the image. So the image really only needs an outline. I typically like to do a relatively thin one. I actually go as small as 0.25. I think that looks better on images, personally. This is all personal. But you can do what you want. It's your creative outlet. But let's look at, we've got an outline there of 1. And then if we click on it again, we can look at the fill. So if we click on that, we can actually fill that empty box with different colors. So it selects different colors. You can do what you want with that. And then you've got an outline and a fill. I'm going to punch this up so we can see what's happening here. You can also adjust those colors over here on the side. So if I select over here, you can see I've got the fill color here and the outline color here. One of the things that this can do is if you actually click this little arrow, it'll swap them. So you can swap those two. And then if I go in and I click just my image, right now you can see there's no fill, but I do have the outline. And then I could come in and I could edit it, I could make it heavier, etc. So both of those are ways to adjust things on these images. You can also do frames in there's a couple different shapes. So you could also do a circle frame. And if you want to do that, we can try to use the same settings over here. We can use the stroke on that, and then we can use the fill. We can use black there. So we've got a couple different options. The other thing we can do here is if we want to match settings of something, we can use the eyedropper tool, and you want to make sure you're over here in the eyedropper, not the color theme, the second one down. And if you select one of your objects, you can use the eyedropper, go to the other object, and it'll match all of the settings, which is handy when you want a consistent layout. Okay? So those are our frames and objects. The other way we can add images to a file is we can open up a folder where we have images. So I'm going to do that here. I've got a folder on the side here that has some more images in it. So we'll go with another image of my dog, and we can just drag him over and drop him on the screen. And you can see you get a little mini thumbnail, and then you drop him on the screen. And what's nice about it is it comes in with the whole frame all the way around the image. What's not as great about it is sometimes if you have a very large picture, it ends up outside of the frame of the sheet. So this one's a little bit outside, but sometimes they can be very far outside. So what do we do when we want to actually make the frame smaller, but we've actually got it set up with the image the way we want it? What we can do is we can hit Control and Shift and then hold the arrow key down in the corner. And what this will do is it'll proportionally change the size of the frame and the picture along with it. So instead of cropping it, which is what would have happened if I'd done this, I can actually move that and the picture will move with it. So once you have it nicely set up the way you want it, it is nice to be able to do that. So now let's look at, now that we've got a couple pictures in here and we've got some frames, here's another one. We can use that eyedropper and match the frame on this picture over here. Let's look at some things we can do to actually organize this layout. So I'm going to use the View tool, and I'm going to do this command, fit page in the window. But View will let you zoom in and zoom out of the sheet. So let's look at some of the options on laying things out in the sheet. So if we go to View again, at the bottom here we have a couple different options. So hide frame edges. If you click that, you see all the X's that were on our frames went away. If you go to show frame edges, they will come right back. Most of the rest of these I don't use. If we go down to grids and guides, this is where things become important. So let's look at show document grid. So if you show the document grid, it turns the whole sheet into a piece of graph paper, and that is really, really helpful. I strongly encourage you all to use this. It allows you to lay elements out on an even grid and set even spacing between things. And then when you are using that grid, what you want to do is have your snap to guides and snap to document grid selected. And what that'll do is it'll allow, see how now the frame of this image is bouncing around just like we did the snaps in Rhino. It'll grab onto the corners of that grid. So watch what happens here. We can take that picture, snap it up into the top corner, and then if I use that Shift Control again, I can drag it, and it will stay on the grid there. Now the one thing that does happen is unless your images are sized exactly to fit on that grid, you may end up a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, but you can choose to crop your images a little bit to lay them out nicely. So I'm just going to move some of these out here. Some people like to work with their images on the outside and then bring them into the drawing sort of one by one. So here's another picture here. We can do the same thing. Make that image fit. The other thing we could do is say we decided we wanted to fill the whole sheet with just pictures. Here we extended that frame, and then this is where we can use some of those other fittings. So we still want to fit everything proportionally, but we could do fill frame proportionally and see how that would move him around a little bit. The other thing we can do is once we've got the frame set, we can use the filled arrow down here, just the one below. We haven't used this one, and it brings up the hand, and you can actually slide the image around and see how it's staying within that frame. And you can set it so it looks nice on the sheet. You can kind of move them around until you get it exposed exactly the way you want to, right? So now you've got this nice spacing. You have the two images set. You've got this nice grid. And then that lays everything out. And then let's look at a couple of ways we can preview our drawings. So we've got screen mode. So this is normal screen mode. This is your working mode. This is all in the view command. We can do preview mode, where it shows you now only what's on the sheet. And now in preview mode, you can actually see the frames better. So I'm seeing that my frame didn't collect settings the way the other one did. So now that eyedropper, what it actually did is it reproportioned my drawing. So maybe I want to undo that, and I just want to come over here and I want to add that black perimeter to my image. So now the two are matching. All right? So that's the preview mode. So I can go there just to check and see that everything's looking the way I want it to look. And I come back here and then I still have all the extra stuff on the sides. The other thing I can do here, and this is where InDesign's really, really great, is that you've got high quality, you've got display performance options. So the way InDesign works is that it's not actually embedding your drawings into the image, it's actually referencing them back to the file where they are. So it will reference a sort of medium quality image when you're working, but you can also, once you have everything set, you can change it to fast display, which will actually just block it out and you don't have to see them. And so if you're typing text or something like that, or the images aren't important, you can set it on fast display, or you can set it on high quality display where it'll bring it up to the highest rendering image that you can. And this will slow your work down a little bit because it's constantly processing that high-res image. I typically work in that sort of medium range most of the time because you get to see what you're working on, but you don't have to get slowed down by the high definition imagery. Other elements you can use to lay your sheets out is you've got the ruler, so you can see here under extras, I think they have the ruler. Oh, here, hide rulers and show rulers. And then you can also have guides. So if I go up here and I click inside that ruler, I can actually drag a line down that is a guide. So this isn't part of the margin and it isn't part of the frame. And I can do this both horizontally and vertically. But maybe it's something that allows me to line a couple things up across the sheet. So say I wanted these images actually not to fill the whole sheet, but I wanted them to line up along that edge. I could create a guide and suddenly my images would snap to that guide. And now I have them lined up there. If I select both of them, so I can use the shift and select both images at once. If I hold the shift key, I can slide them over orthogonally, just like we do in Rhino. Up, down, left, right. If I do that, maybe I want to adjust my images to match the grid a little bit better, so I keep an even spacing. Maybe I want to fit content to the frame just to make sure it fills out just right. But now I've got a guide that I'm lining everything up with that's different than the margins and such. And those are very useful for when you start to come in and add text or other elements that are non-image based images. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about your assignment for next week. So you're going to have 3 images to lay out on a sheet, and you're going to have to do multiple setups. So I'm just going to clean some of this stuff out. So if I want to move these things out of the way, I can just delete them. I can move the guides, and then we can use them later. So you have 3 images that you need to put on a sheet. So you can take those images and export them directly from Rhino as PDFs, and you can drop a PDF into this file, and they actually work very well. So let's look at a couple images from a screen. So I made 3 images already of a sample solar screen for this assignment. So if I want to put these into the document, I can do either this, I can drag them and drop them in here. I could actually drag a couple of them at once and see it'll let me drop them one at a time. I could also have made the frames and dropped them in, so let's look at how we could have done that. There's different efficiencies to different elements, so I'm going to make a frame here and say maybe I want to pre-plan a little bit. And I can look at my images. I know my elevation is long and skinny, my perspective is sort of tall, and my axonometric is sort of long. So maybe I make a frame that is longer and skinny. Maybe I make a frame that's sort of taller. And I'm doing this on the grid. And then I make another one that's sort of generally rectangular. Then I can take my images and I can place them. So we'll place my axonometric here. And then we'll come over here and we'll select this frame and we'll place the elevation in here. And I'm just dropping them in, I'm not resizing them or anything yet. And we can place the perspective in here. Okay, so none of them are fitting. So the first thing I would do is I would come in and I would do I would fit the content. So I want to click each of these frames. And I should be able to do these all at once. And I can do fit content proportionally. I think that's the best way to start. And then you can start to resize things. So maybe you could come in here, especially with the PDFs where you have a lot of extra sheet space. I could come in here and I could actually make my frame very close to the edges of my elevation. And I could use that, drag it into the corner, and then use that Control Shift. And look at that. I can drag it, and then I could move the image a little bit in there till I get it centered a little bit. I could also use the arrows to nudge it around. So I've got that. And then the perspective is actually more, I had forgotten, it was actually more of a horizontal view. So I can move that frame over there. And if I'm not careful, I have to make sure I'm selecting the frame and not the image. You can tell you're on the frame if it's blue, and you're on the image if it's orange. And then let's fit the frame to the content on this one. And then maybe we want to make that perspective a little bit bigger. Or maybe we want to make these two stack. So you can kind of work on how these arrange on a sheet. It's going to take some time. That's kind of the art of InDesign. But with the frames, you can get them to line up. You can get your spacing nice and even. But now I've got an image here, an image here, an image here. I've got two spaces. Let's just make sure we're on the grid. We've got two whole spaces between each of these images. So now I have everything that I need on this sheet, okay, in terms of images. So the other thing we need to do is we need to create text. So now we can go over here to the text tool and we can create some text. In the text tool, you get a text box and then you can start typing your text. So we'll say text. So we can say rule set number 1. And then let's just say we've got, that's our title. That seems a little small and that font is not a font I would choose. So let's see what happens when we highlight that font. So you just double click on it, highlight it, and then go up here. And here are your font choices. So I'm just going to use Arial. And then I'm going to maybe look and see how big I can make the fonts till they look good. So that looks pretty good. If I like this, but maybe I want it to be bold and italic, you can actually do your bold and italics here. So we've got rule set number 1, bold and italic. Now, if I want to change the color on this, I do it the same way I changed the colors on the boxes. So I can do fill, and I can change it. Say I want it blue, got it blue, whatever you want to do. There, that looks good, right? Make good judgments. So we've got rule set number 1. And then what else do we have to do? We have to do different rules. So once you have a font that you like, you can duplicate it. The other thing you could do is you can click on it and hit the Alt button. And if you hit Alt, you see you get an extra arrow comes up, and you can actually drag that box down and it'll just make a copy of it. So now we want to actually list our rule sets. So let's highlight these. And maybe we don't want our rule sets in bold, italic, maybe just on italic, and maybe the text doesn't need to be quite as big, or we won't be able to fit the information there. So maybe it's probably 14 is good. So you'll have your rules, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put them in there nice and tidy. Rules, rules, rules. If you don't have the rules, you can just set it up. I'm just going to cut and paste some stuff. So now I know these two things relate to each other. Maybe I think blue is too much for everything. I could come in here, change my fill, and change it to black, or I could change it to, this is one thing I like in InDesign is you can change it. Instead of going to gray, you can choose what percentage of black. So you could do like an 80% gray. Then you know you're always matching your grays. So if we look at this, we can look at what it looks like in our preview mode. All right, that's looking pretty good. I think we're missing a few things on this sheet. Maybe that text is a little close to the title. So you can see in the preview mode, you can start to move things around. So I can start to drag the information down. Maybe I also think these are a little small now that we've got the rules in there, but we're also missing our name, the class name, the assignment, that kind of information. So let's go back to our normal mode and maybe let's resize a few things now that we've got all the information in. That's one of the great things about InDesign is you kind of put the information in and then you can reorganize it. So let's say we want, maybe the axon fits here under the rules. And maybe we make the perspective bigger because we like the perspective drawing. Again, make sure you've got the frame selected when you move them around. And then here, do that Shift Control to resize. Now I've got that image looks nice. And then maybe I can make this image move around. So here's something that's happening is right now my text, when I go to click on my axonometric view, I'm clicking on my text. And so if I want to get to something that is maybe underneath something else, I need to arrange it. So right now the rules are on top. If I right click under arrange, you can send images. If you imagine them like stacks of paper on a sheet, you could send that text to the back. And then when I go to click, now my axonometric's in the middle. So then maybe I want my frame like that, and then let's center that image. And that works better. And then the thing I'd like to do with all of these, I'm actually going to make my elevation a little bit larger so that it's filling that box. So I'm just going to make it just a little bit bigger. Make sure you hold down Shift to keep your proportions. But I want that gray to fill that whole box. And that looks pretty good. I'm just going to bring this box down, one grid, and then I'm going to bring these two down so that my spacing matches. And then I'm going to put a frame on all of these. So I'm going to go into stroke here, make that black. We'll leave it at 1 point. I'm going to max that out to the margin, and then let's just do another preview. Look how good that looks. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to get our name on this sheet. So looks like we need to move everything up just a little bit to make room for that. Bottom. You can move that image in a little bit. So you're always just sort of wiggling everything around until you get that working. So now we can go to the bottom, and maybe we want to use that same font for our name, so we can do again. We can either do Control-C and then Control-V. That'll copy it. And we can actually make this box a lot smaller. And see what happens when I made that small. See, I get that little plus sign over here. That means that there's more text underneath that I'm not seeing. So they're wanting to warn you that you wrote a bunch of stuff that's not visible inside that frame. So I'm just going to go and delete everything inside except for the first line. And maybe for this project, I want to have my name over here. And then say, this is one way I like to lay out a lot of my projects, is I'll have a box on the left. And then maybe I make a copy of that. And I want to look at having a box on the right that says that this is Methods 2, Assignment 4, Part 1, March 27th, 2024. So that looks good, except that I wish that were right justified or centered. So I could right justify it by going up. If I highlight the text box here, you can see I get my justification options up here. I do align right, it shifts it over to the right. If I wanted to center it, I could choose, click again, I could choose center, right? So I could also say center all of the text and make it 2 lines. Say put my name. name here. And I could have everything centered like that. There's a bunch of different ways you could lay your sheet out. I'm going to do the right justified version. I think that looks good. It is up to you to do whatever you want. So now we have a sheet where everything, do a little preview. Look how good everything looks, right? You've got a nice amount of control over all of that information. Okay, so let's take a pause and then let's look at how we can use InDesign to make this super easy and do it a bunch more times. Okay, so now we have a sheet that we like that we've laid out. And now we want to create multiple sheets using the same format for each of your 3 different rule sets. Okay, so when we did this in Rhino, we had to create a new layout each time. In InDesign, it's similar, but I would say much easier to create different layouts. So what we're going to do here is if we look at our sheet, we've got the properties selected here. What we want to see is our page sheet. So if we go to Window, Window has a bunch of the tools. So if you're looking for something and you can't find it, sometimes it's up here under Windows. So you can kind of explore options there. So Pages, we also have Color, Stroke, Styles, there's some text elements, but let's just click on Pages. So we click on Pages and we've got this page command coming up. So we've got one page right now. If we go to the bottom, we can go here and we can add pages. So I'm just going to click on this box with a plus in it and see how it adds one page and then it adds another page. So now what we've got here are what we call facing pages. And this is if you wanted to set something up like a book where you wanted to be able to open up 2 pages and see both the left page and the right page as one big layout. For this assignment and for this project going forward, we're not going to want to use facing pages. We just want each page to be its own document. So if you look over here under Properties, or if you can't find Properties, open the Properties window here. But under Properties, you can see in the same place where we set this up as an 11 by 17 tabloid document, it also has this checkbox here called Facing Pages. So we can uncheck that. And when we do that, it resets up the document. So we just have individual pages. All right, so now you can see we've got each of these individual pages. So I'm just going to change my view to fit the page in the window. And then maybe zoom out a little bit because we're a little close in. There. So now we can see we've got these pages. Right, and we're in our preview mode, so we're seeing all that gray space. If we go back to normal, we would see the grid and the margins and all that stuff carries through from page to page. So if we wanted to take this layout and use it on another page, there's a couple different ways we can do it. One is that if you go up to that page and you right click on it, you can do duplicate spread. So let's just see what happens when we do that. So what duplicate spread did is now we have 2 matching pages of all the same information, and you could come in here and you could do start changing text, rule set number 2, change your rules, start to swap out your images, and that works great. The other thing you can do is you can actually select everything. So just like Rhino, we can use the arrows and we can drag, select all the information on a sheet, and then we can do Control C for copy. And then when we go to the next page, we can click in that page. And then if you go to edit, you can do, instead of paste, which I'll paste it wherever, if you do paste in place, it'll paste it in exactly the same place on that sheet as the previous sheet. So everything is laid out, organized, and lined up exactly the way they are on each of these sheets. So now we could go in and we could set up rule set 3. Now what's great about this is if you have a new set of rules and a new set of drawings, you can go in, you can delete the images inside each of these frames, but you can go in and you can drag images, put new images into those frames. So you can do your new rule set, and here you could come in and put your new perspective in there. So look what happens when I just go and I place I know this is the same file, but imagine this were a different file. Say open, drops the same file right in there. And it actually keeps the proportions of what you set up the first time. So I could place the elevation in there. So if I come up with a good layout that works for my first rule set, I can do the exact same layout for all 3 rule sets. Okay, so this will save you so much time. So much time. That's the whole point of it. And I think you'll see it's actually pretty easy and fast to navigate. And if we look at our view setup, we can do that high quality display performance, and it'll see how it reses everything up. You can come in here, edit your rules. This stuff can stay exactly the same because your name and the assignment information doesn't change for these first 3 pages. So all of that is super useful. So that's the best way to copy things from page to page. And then when you're over here on pages, you can actually go back and forth. If you just double click on a page, it'll take you to that page. So the longer your document becomes, the easier it is to navigate between all of them. Okay, okay, so that's editing your documents. You've got facing pages. You can also use the hand tool if you want to just kind of drag your files around. Right? So it'll just copy everything for you. So those things are all super important. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is we want to come in and we want to do what's called packaging the file. So let's set up the file the way we want it. I'm going to take this last slide and I'm going to get rid of it. I'm just going to click that garbage can. So I've got my 3 slides that are all done with my 3 different sets of rules, and this is what we need to turn in for the next assignment. And then what I want to do is I want to create a file that brings everything together. So like we said, that the images are not actually embedded in this file. They are referencing where they are in folders throughout your computer. So right now, these files are in a folder called, in my drive, called Week 9 Lectures. Okay? And you can see I've got the InDesign folder that I'm working on right now and some of these elements. But if I were to open this InDesign on another computer, it wouldn't be able to find these images because these images wouldn't be on the same computer. So what InDesign lets you do is it lets you create what's called a package. And this is a really, really important part of InDesign and what makes it work so well. So when you're saving a file, you want to obviously save your work as you're going along, but say when you're done for the day, what you want to do is you want to package the file up, and I'll show you what happens when we package it. So first I'm going to save it, which I should have been doing all along. So we save the file, then we go back to File again, and we go down to the bottom, we go to Package. So let's just click it and see what happens. So if you go through here, you can see that it's going to save any fonts that you're using. It's going to save any images that you're using, any colors, any special settings, but really it's the images and the fonts that are important here. So sometimes people like to use fancy fonts that aren't always available on all computers. So it puts all of this together. So let's just click Package. And when it packages, it's going to ask you where you want to put it. So you want to put it somewhere on your OneDrive. So I'm going to put it here. So InDesign Demo, and it's going to create a folder. So you want to give it a name that makes sense. So we'll call this Week 9 InDesign Demo. And then just hit Package. Let all the stuff be the default. And then it's going to process. And you're going to wait for it to process. And it's going to do a couple things. It's going to reorganize everything, and it's going to create a PDF for you. So when you're totally done with this assignment, you can package it and it'll have a completed PDF that you can use to turn in. So let's see what happens. So it's done now. Let's go back to that folder. So week 9 lecture, this is the folder we just created, week 9 InDesign demo. If I double click on it, you can see firstly it has an InDesign file, INDD, that's your InDesign document. It's going to have a markup document. I'm not really sure what those are used for. I don't ever use it. It's got a PDF. And then what it also has, if you go into links, is it's taken all of the images I have and it's made a copy of it and put it into this folder. And then it's also taken all the fonts. So it copies those into that folder. So if I want to take this file and use it next time I want to edit it or work on it, I want to come into this file that I just created inside my packaged file. And that will be referencing these links and these fonts, so you know that everything you need for that file is all together. So this is a really important step. So then you can also double click here on your InDesign demo. Let's see what your PDF looks like. So now you've got a PDF where everything's lined up. And now see, look how great this is when you have a PDF where everything lines up. If I go from page to page, the only thing that changes from here to here is the number 1 and the number 2. Everything else is exactly the same. You look super professional when all your stuff doesn't bounce around on the sheet. So because we've copied it and we duplicated it and we made it all match, it all looks really great together as a presentation. So that is all that you're going to need to do that next assignment. So if we go back to InDesign, if we were to open this up again, I could go into that packaged folder and I would go into this file and open it up. And then it will reference all of my files here. So they're all in here. So you can take that from one computer to the other. So if you work in the computer lab, when you're done working, package it all, save it in your OneDrive. Then when you go to work on it in your dorm or in some other computer lab or whatever you want to do, you'll have everything there. If you don't do that, your image files in particular are going to be wherever you left them. So if you put them on the desktop or in the download folder in the computer lab, you're not going to be able to access them when you're not here. So it's really important to take everything with you. Okay, so that is everything you need to know to do assignment 4, part 1. Thank you so much.